Good evening and welcome. This is The Chase, Zimbabwe's premier current affairs program. Hello, I'm Andy Hodges. Within the past decade, Zimbabwe has experienced a population growth from 13 to 15 million, an increased rural-urban migration rate from 33 to 39%, and an urbanization rate of 2% per annum. This has increased the demand for housing, with the national backlog rising to over 2 million from 600,000 in 2011. In response, informal settlements and slums have been surfacing and sprouting within and around cities, towns, growth points, and development service centers, as people resort to self-help, sometimes unprocedural and illegal means of acquiring land to construct houses. In 2018, in response to the demands created by this urban development backlog, the government kickstarted an urban renewal program aimed at construction of new cities, such as in Mount Hamden, rehabilitation of some of Zimbabwe's oldest residential suburbs in Harare, Bulawayo, Chitungwiza, Mutare, and Kwekwe, and regularization and upgrading of slums and informal settlements into world-class settlements by 2030. In addition, in line with National Development Strategy, or NDS-1, the government intends to acquire 10,000 hectares of land for urban development, including construction of 225,000 houses by 2025. With urbanization, urban renewal, in situ regularization, and informal settlements and land acquisition for house construction, will this process trigger an expansion of urban areas into rural areas? Will citizens already occupying communal and agricultural land on the outskirts of urban areas, growth points, and development service centers be displaced and even possibly relocated? Will communities affected resist any form of forced displacement? Is a UN new urban agenda being implemented in Zimbabwe? What is the best way to facilitate and regulate urban development and expansion? Our discussion, New Capital City, the battle for urban renewal. Join me and my guest tonight live on The Chase. Welcome back. This is The Chase, Zimbabwe's premier current affairs program, live on ZTN Prime from ZTN Studios in Harare, Zimbabwe. This broadcast is brought to you by ZTN Prime and the Center for Conflict Management and Transformation, CCMT. Now, joining us this evening to discuss New Capital City, the battle for urban renewal, I'm joined by Honourable Minister Daniel Garwe. He's Zimbabwe's Minister of National Housing and Social Amenities. Francis Mukora, Advocacy Officer at the Center for Conflict Management and Transformation, CCMT. And joining us telephonically will be Trimo Muderere, an urban planning specialist. Minister, Francis, welcome to The Chase.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, to my guests, you are all free to interject. However, remember here at ZTN Prime, our values are dignity, dialogue, and debate. Now, all views expressed on The Chase are those of our guests and do not reflect the views of Zimbabwe Newspapers 1980 Limited or ZTN Prime. And to our viewers watching ZTN Prime, we'd like to hear from you. Join this discussion via our Facebook page, Zim Papers TV Network, or via our Twitter handle at ZTN Prime. Your voice is important to us. Minister, I'd like to start with you. It's been a year since the official launch of the Zimbabwe National Human Settlements Policy, and we know that by virtue of being the custodian of the policy, your ministry, to a large extent, is responsible for ensuring access to adequate housing and development of urban settlements. So, Minister, can you tell us about the policy and what your ministry or government in general has been doing to fulfill the policy's aspirations? And I also want to link it in to the UN New Urban Agenda. Does it resonate with that as well?
Thank you, Andy. Let me say good evening to viewers. Perhaps let me start by inviting you to celebrate with us the third year of our existence as a Minister of National Housing and Social Amenities. We were celebrating our birthday yesterday.
Oh, happy birthday, sir.
Thank you very much. And also join me again to celebrate the first year of the existence of the Human Settlements Policy, which was launched again in November 2021 and has reached its first year this year. Andy, government is so much committed to the delivery of housing. Hence the creation of the National Human Settlements Policy, which among other issues is looking at security of tenure, that every piece of land that is set aside for human settlements must have access to land security, which means people must have access to title deeds. We have noticed the need to provide the housing for everybody, and we are aware of the fact that land is a finite resource. Therefore, through the policy, we are now focusing on densification, vertical construction, utilizing our open spaces. That's what we are doing. We are aware of the existence of irregular settlements. In Zimbabwe, we do not have slums, but we have got irregular settlements or informal settlements.
I will talk to you about that later.
We have informal settlements throughout the country in all urban areas. And we now, through the policy, we have now created a framework upon which we've invited the private sector to join government on an engineering, procurement, construction, and financing model to regularize all our informal settlements. And we have started that program in Harare. We're doing Heathcliff, Caledonia, Harare South, we've got Southry Park. We go to Manicaland, we're working on Gimboki, and many other parts throughout the country, which are falling under the regularization agenda. We are aware of the need to provide clean water, and aware government is moving throughout the country in drilling boreholes.
I will talk about that. Urban Minister, I want to bring in the UN New Urban Agenda because obviously it really speaks to the fact that new town planning has to be done. It talks about green cities. It talks about issues such as emissions, which is very different to how we used to build cities in Zimbabwe and in Africa in particular. So your policy or the government's policy, does it sort of address the new way that we need to urban plan and build cities, particularly like, for example, Mount Hampden is a good example?
When the policy was formulated or created, it obviously it was done in consultation with United Nations Agenda 2063. And the new urban agenda from the United Nations speaks to the need to provide new building materials that are very affordable, materials that do not require the degradation of our forests and trees, cutting trees because we want to burn bricks, and things like that. So yes, we are in line with the new urban agenda. The new planning should ensure that on-site, off-site services are provided, basic services are provided before any superstructures are being constructed. And the policy is speaking to that as well. We are looking at climate change and its impact to the communities. Design of houses, design of new buildings, the social amenities must speak to resilience. Do we have resilient designs that are not only resilient but also affordable? Because 70% of the Zimbabwean population is falling under the social housing cluster. So as we plan the cities, we must be cognizant of the need to go up, the need to provide new technologies that ensure fast delivery of construction and within reach, of course, by the general public.
We're now joined telephonically by Trimo Muderere. He's an urban planning specialist. Trimo, welcome to The Chase.
Thank you, Andy. Good evening, John.
Good evening, sir. Now, Trimo, the new urban agenda was adopted 6 years ago at the Habitat 3 conference in Quito, Ecuador. The agenda sets a new global standard for sustainable urban development and will help countries rethink how they plan, manage, and live in cities. Could you expand and explain what the new urban agenda is and exactly what it seeks to achieve?
Thank you, Andy, for such an interesting question. It's essentially a global framework to create an enchanting promise for citizens living in human settlements, so that their right to the city, their right to live within a sustainable environment with equitable service delivery is guaranteed. By and large, nation states are then expected to localize these global best practices in their justices.
Trimo, hello? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
So, Trimo, okay, now I know that a lot of leaders around the world, including in Africa, signed on to the UN Urban Agenda. So how, in your views, can you link the UN Urban Agenda to the national settlements policy that we have in Zimbabwe and other policies, of course, to increase settlements around the continent? Do you think that it should be a priority for developing countries like Zimbabwe or not? What do you believe?
Thank you, Andy. Essentially, it should be a priority for any nation, developing or a developed nation. What is of primary importance is to note that the new urban agenda creates or advocates for for the creation of equitable and sustainable human settlements. And for any responsible nation or state, it's the obligation of a government to provide for such services, either local or central. So it's of primary importance for countries that are developing, which have not optimized specific services to their population.
The SDGs also speak to housing for all as well. I mean, that's one of the goals of the SDGs, the UN SDGs, correct?
Yes, correct.
All right, thank you. Francis, obviously organization CCMT, you work with informal settlers as well as rural communities affected by expansion of urban settlements into their areas. What are your thoughts on the relevance and practicality of the Zimbabwe National Human Settlements Policy for such communities?
Thanks, Andy, for having us again. But before that, I think I have a complaint to Honorable Minister that I wasn't invited to the birthday celebrations yesterday. But again, congratulations on wishing 3 years. And I know I'll get the cake delivered. But yeah, to answer your question, as the CCMT and in terms of the communities that we work with, we believe that the National Human Settlements Policy is a very relevant and a very important piece of legislation or a policy framework that has got substantial potential to move this country forward in terms of creating smart cities and also providing security of tenure to those that require such security of tenure. Exactly, or slightly more than a year ago, I think we sat in this room, the three of us, to discuss, to celebrate the official launch of the Zimbabwe National Human Settlements Policy. And my message to the minister and to government, to be specific, was to say that what we need going forward is to see implementation, actual implementation of the policy, because as it stands, as it stood then, it was a good piece of legislation, a policy framework that has got so much potential. And now to come to the issue of its relevance to the communities that we work with, we think and we believe and we know that it has got so much potential to address the issues that are of importance to these communities. The first one being security of tenure that the minister spoke about. These people require security of tenure because the threat of arbitrary eviction and house demolitions, which have been seeing like consistently over the past 10 to 15 years, still hangs above their heads. So we believe that if government goes ahead and implements the provisions of the policy vis-a-vis provision of security of tenure in title deeds, it has got so much potential to address that issue.
But Francis, before you continue, I just want to touch on something. You said that, as you said, a year ago when we sat here at ZTN Prime and had the same discussion about the policy, you said that you wanted implementation to be key. So, I mean, but government minister here was clear about some of the issues that government has done to implement this policy. Are you saying that you think implementation of it is not sufficient?
No, I'm not saying that it's not sufficient, but I'm just saying that more needs to be done. There is legitimate expectation from the citizens. And the ministers knows, and you probably know, that in terms of the results of the census that came out recently, not more than 3 months ago, one of the issues that came out there, because it also spoke about the living conditions of the citizens, especially in informal settlements. And well, we do not have slums, but informal settlements. It says that there is lack of access to basic social services. The need for security of tenure is critical and it's needed. And it's one thing that the government committed to. And I'm sure the minister has already said that they are trying the best that they can do. But what we are saying is that we need more, and as soon as possible to be able to
let me reach the minister. Minister, of course you can respond, but let me ask you this question. Look, in my preamble, I spoke about the urbanization rate of 2% per annum, a national housing backlog rising to over 2 million, and the possible, some say inevitable, expansion of urban areas into rural areas as the cities expand. Of course, we're infringing onto rural areas which are on the outskirts, with an increase in rural to urban migration resulting in a rising housing demand, all of which is happening against an alleged backdrop of limited and dwindling capacity for provision of basic services such as roads, water and sanitation facilities, especially in informal settlements. So what specifically are the Zimbabwe government's programs to deliver houses and to improve social service delivery, bearing in mind the government's stated goal of ensuring access to housing for all as enunciated in the country's Vision 2030?
Thank you for that comprehensive question. Let me look at, let me segment it into several parts. The first one being, we have what we are calling the Department of rural housing and social amenities, which is predominantly focusing on transforming the rural outlook in terms of housing. We are now saying, let's bring urbanization to the rural areas, focusing on development of the rural district councils, where we're now building flats, modern social amenities, inviting regional and international players like Pick and Pay, OK, to come and invest in those areas, create employment, identify the economic drivers of those specific areas, invite industry to come and invest in those areas, create employment, and also create housing for those people. And have a reverse movement. People, instead of moving from rural to urban areas, we have people moving from urban to rural areas. So that's one department. The other department is the urban housing and social amenities department, focusing on things like smart cities, urban renewal, urban regeneration, upgrading of the sewer, water, electrical services in the urban areas. You are aware that the population in Zimbabwe, especially in the urban areas, grew exponentially high and was not matched with the upgrading of the existing services. So we are seized with that matter, and we are working very closely with the Minister of Local Government and Public Works to ensure that urban regeneration becomes a reality. Urban regeneration is not only looking at upgrading of areas like Mbare, Makokova, and so on and so forth, but also looking at upgrading of these services, water reticulation, water supply, electricity reticulation and supply, and all those things. So we are looking at that under that department. We also have realized that in terms of the Vision 2030, as pronounced by His Excellency in 2018, we will not have arrived to that destination if we focus on all our energies in terms of development on the urban areas. We have got 65% to 7% of this country's population domiciled in our rural communities, where predominantly they use Blair toilets and pit latrines. The ministry, through the policy, have now come up with a rural waste management technology, which ensures removing of all pit latrines and Blair toilets using the same infrastructure that is there. You don't demolish the building. You just close the holes and install the new technology, which flushes using grey water. And we have already started working on schools throughout the country. We intend to capacitate or install about 3,000 ponds this coming, the first quarter of 2023. And all these things are already work in progress. He has said a lot needs to be done. Believe you me, we are celebrating success because a lot is being done. It's just that as Zimbabweans, we choose not to see that which is good. We choose to focus on the ugly. And every environment has got the ugly and the beautiful, but let's focus on the beautiful, and this is what we are doing as a government.
Minister, if I can just quickly touch on service delivery, particularly here we're talking about roads, sanitation, water, and let's just look at the urban area for a second. I mean, obviously, it's a fact that if you look at cities like Harare, for example, there's a huge outcry from citizens and residents about the lack of social service delivery, particularly by council and so forth. I mean, this is a fact, and even today there was a lot of noise about that when City of Harare announced its budget. And of course, it's about money as well, isn't it? So you're talking about improving social service delivery in existing areas, but you're also now talking about putting in new social service delivery for informal settlements or new settlements. I mean, this is a lot of money. I mean, this is no joke. What is the plan around that? Are you looking at PPPs? What are you looking at as a ministry?
Well, we're using various combinations. Where Treasury can provide funding, we're using that funding, like on the raw waste management systems. It's a Treasury-funded program. But on regularization of settlements, we've invited the private sector, and they on an engineering, procurement, construction, and finance basis, and we've got a model where they can recover their costs on a given period of time. The beneficiaries will then pay for the piece of land and the services provided. It creates what is like a simplified mortgage system to ensure that over a period of 5, 10, 15 years, they will have paid for the services and paid for the land, and title deeds are processed.
Are you saying this is already in place, or is something
already in place?
It's already in place.
Yes.
Francis, we talk about housing for all. Why then, in your view, does provision of basic services such as roads, water and sanitation facilities, especially in informal settlements, play a role in this?
First and foremost, I think let's deal with first things first, because one of the arguments that has been put around by government at whatever level, central government and even at local government level, is that in most cases it's difficult to provide these services, water reticulation, roads in informal settlements, because most of them do not have the legal status, and makes it almost impossible for government at whatever level to plan and provide these services. So in terms of the human settlements policy, I would think that the first thing that we should do is to try and complete the regularization process. And I know and I believe that the regularization process would, to a certain extent, also combined with the expansion of the urban areas into areas that are currently peri-urban, and some of which are even communal lands. We know what has been happening in areas such as Domboshava, closer to Harare, to a certain extent Seke, and even around Harare, areas such as Hopley, to a certain extent Epworth, there is no regularization and service delivery is a bit difficult. But where we come in as CCMT, which is a question that you asked at the beginning, to what extent is this relevant to us, is that whenever processes, development processes that such as this, good as they are, when they happen, there is always bound to be potential for conflict. Conflict in the sense that there is need to balance the needs of the government to develop the nation, but also needs to protect the rights of the citizens as they are provided for in the Constitution. So where we come in as the CCMT is to say, how best can we also be a partner to government to try and see that conflicts such as these, inevitable as they are minimized, and then we create win-win situation that balances the national aspirations and also the needs and the rights of
Francis,
the citizens.
later on in the program, I am going to talk about this conflict resolution and some of the ideas that you, Minister, and of course Trimor has in terms of how to resolve them and how things can go smoothly. But let me bring in Trimor. Trimor, I'd like your opinion. What do you think are the key issues that Zimbabwe should take into consideration in order for its housing delivery and urban development programs to be inclusive and sustainable? Trimor, are you still with us? All right, we'll try getting back. In the meantime, we'll take a breather. You're watching The Chase, Zimbabwe's premier current affairs program. Our discussion this evening, New Capital City, the battle for urban renewal. This podcast is brought to you by ZTN Prime and the Center for Conflict Management and Transformation, CCMT. As I said, it's time for us to take a breather. Don't go away. The Chase, we'll be right back.
It's summertime and ZTM Prime is about to get hotter. We turn up the hit with live Premier Soccer League action.
Nice strike! Oh, better than nice! Wonderful! Magnificent player.
Love, betrayal, tragedy.
It is Bobby.
Welcome to my party, man. This is ASAP.
Get your chew on. Travel and lifestyle have never looked this good. Catch the hit this summer on ZTM Prime DSTV channel 294.
Welcome back. This is The Chase, Zimbabwe's premier current affairs program. And of course, it's live here on ZTN Prime from Harare, Zimbabwe. Our discussion this evening, New Capital City, the battle for urban renewal. This broadcast is brought to you by ZTN Prime and the Center for Conflict Management and Transformation, CCMT. Let me just try Trimor, because before we were trying to get him. Trimor, are you back with us? All right, okay, we'll try and get him later. Minister, I'll come to you. I want to now focus, of course, on informal settlements. Now, the National Census Zimbabwe carried out earlier this year captured data on living conditions of citizens. Among other things, the census highlighted that a significantly high percentage of citizens, especially those in informal settlements, do not have had access to social services, electricity, roads, water, sanitation facilities. So, in your opinion, in your ministry's obviously research, Minister, how big is the problem of informal settlements in Zimbabwe? And do you have a plan to address this?
Thank you very much. The problem is huge, but it can be resolved. It can be solved because the problem was created by us, the citizens and government. Yahweh in 2016, government embarked on a parallel development program where government invited developers to bring technical expertise and financial resources to work on housing delivery. Government had land which was very affordable at intrinsic value. So government says, here's a piece of land, can you go and provide basic services together with the construction of houses at the same time so that we reduce this backlog on housing. Unfortunately, government lagged on the supervision aspect to see whether the developers were doing things in terms of the mandate. And the developers took advantage of that and started selling virgin land and pieces of land which were not developed. This was the genesis or the birth of this informal settlement. But going back to time of existence, the informal settlements that we're experiencing today were created as far back as 1890, when this country was invaded by colonialists. The legitimate owners of the pieces of land were displaced and put in areas where they were not, which were not habitable. That was the beginning of informal settlements. If you may want, all the rural communities are informal settlements. Those are huge informal settlements that never had any services. One road to service the whole community, which is probably thousands of square kilometers. You know, that was the beginning of informal settlements.
So move them away from the colonialists
now,
in the city.
There was an expectation, legitimate though, that was created and deliberately created for people to want to come and live in urban areas because that's where the services were. There was electricity, there was processed water and so on and so forth, and the employment also was in the urban areas. So with independence in 1980, there was a huge movement of people from the informal settlements, which we were calling rural communities, to urban areas in search of greener pastures, be it employment, clean water, electricity, and so on and so forth. That movement was not planned. And we saw all the areas where the black communities were living full to the brim in terms of population. Then with now the need to provide accommodation, the parallel development policy, which we then superseded with the National Human Settlements Policy, ensured that was trying to quick start the process of housing delivery by saying, build a road as you build the house. But that was not, did not take place. Those are now legacy.
Just built wherever they wanted
yes,
to.
Those are now legacy
illegally.
issues which we are now dealing with in terms of regularization. In the regularization, I think the simplified approach is people look at the provision of basic services. The answer is no. It's a whole, it's a cocktail of issues that we need to look at. We start from the land ownership, which is the Minister of Lands, or the president himself, who is the principal owner of the land. He then hands over the land to Minister of Local Government to transfer it from cropping land to urban state land. Once the land is in the hands of local government, they now come with layout plans. They prepare the master plans and so on and so forth. In certain informal settlements, the master plans were created. That's why we are now focusing on sanitization. In other areas, it was haphazard, it was not created. We are now saying, with the whole of government approach, the Minister of Lands hands over the land to Minister of Local Government. Minister of Local Government prepares the master plans and layout plans and everything. We then come in and ensure that we get engineers to provide the engineering designs for roads, water, and sewer, and invite developers with money to come and join us in providing those services.
Right.
The land hasn't been paid for, remember.
Right.
We've accepted as government that we need to cut our losses, and the citizens must also accept that they must cut their losses as well in terms of the money that was misused by the land barons or the developers then who tend
So we need to move forward, basically.
We need to move forward, basically. So we are saying, here's a piece of land which we want to process title deeds for you, but you need to pay for the land. You do not have the money to provide the services, so as government, but we've identified an investor, domestic or foreign, who wants to come with the financial resources and equipment and expertise to provide the water, sewer, and road network, this time including ICT services, Wi-Fi. Then we look at your piece of your stand, which is probably 200 square meters, 200 meters long by 200 meters wide. You pay for the 200 meters that is covered by the road, that is covered by sewer, or that is covered by electricity. That's what you pay for. And then you pay for the land that is yours. Then those services are provided. Ministry of Local Government, through its local authorities, will now issue, when the services are provided, will issue the developers with what is called a certificate of completion or certificate of compliance,
Right.
which means everybody has complied. That certificate of compliance is now moved from the local authority to the deeds office for the processing of the paper called the title deed.
Okay, Minister. Let's say we take an informal settlement that's sprouted up around Zimbabwe. I think there's some in Caledonia. I think Hopewell, and there's areas that you know about. I mean, this is a process because you have huge communities there, vast numbers of people that don't have service delivery, they don't have roads, some of them don't have electricity, they don't have water running and so forth. I mean, it's completely unplanned. I mean, how then would you deal with that? I mean, you can't really sort of have a master plan because they're already there. How do you regularize those? And how do you also, more importantly, stop it happening again and again?
Well, that's why we have got the laws that ensure that people stop doing that. But what we've done through the Ministry of Higher and Tertiary Education, they've got a Department of Geospatial Planning in the Space Agency, which is moving around the whole country, doing what is called mapping, identifying the people that are legitimately settled in terms of the master plan produced by Ministry of Local Government. Okay. And those that are illegitimate, or those that settle themselves in areas where are supposed to provide other services like schools, shopping centers, we've identified areas where we will relocate them and then provide services first, and then they'll be resettled there. Government has come up with a program on social housing to ensure that those that are in those areas can be compensated through resettling them in these new areas. We've got a housing program coming up now in Zivarasekwa flats, where people will be moved from wetland areas to those areas, yes.
All right, Minister, I am going to talk about this compensation issue a bit later, but Trimo, I hope you're back with us. Trimo, I have two specific questions for you. My first one really is your opinion and views on what you think are the key issues that Zimbabwe should take into consideration in order for its housing delivery and urban development programs to be inclusive and sustainable. All right, we seem to be having communication issues there, but we will obviously try and get him back. Francis, look, basically, I mean, CCMT, you obviously have regular engagements with residents of informal settlements. What is their perspective? I mean, which challenges do they experience, and what do they expect from both government and, of course, local authorities, which are a critical component in any urban renewal program, particularly in existing cities?
Firstly, I think let me also highlight that this challenge of informal settlement it's not only happening in Harare or Bulawayo or these big cities. It's also even happening in small towns, growth points, and development service centers.
That's the whole country.
Yeah, it's literally happening across the country, but we tend to focus more on that which is happening in the bigger cities. And remember that I think around 1982, when government gazetted certain areas as development centers and growth points, but then it took several years for development processes by the local authority to start happening. In the meantime, the population was growing. People were moving as closer to the towns as possible. Even the land barons and those that are not land barons were actually speculating, knowing that at some point in time, the towns are going to be expanding in the areas around those that were gazetted. So people started moving into those areas. But then to come to your question about the perceptions of the people in informal settings, the expectations, let me speak about the perceptions and the beliefs and then the expectations. Most of them, based on the interaction that we have had as an institution, is that they feel that they've got a legitimate right to be where they are right now, even though most of them are not there legitimately and were not given the permission to settle on that piece of land by the authorities, be they central government or local government. So, right or wrong, and in terms of the Constitution, to a certain extent, the right to shelter in Section 74 of the Constitution says that every citizen of Zimbabwe should not be arbitrarily displaced from where they are. That again brings in the issue of some kind of a conflict or a mismatch between what government aspires to do in terms of the law and their duties and responsibilities, and also what the citizens expect as the citizens of the nation with the rights and responsibilities that are provided for by the Constitution. So their expectation from government is to say that they require security of tenure. They also require provision of services. And the way we come in as the CCMT is to say this misunderstanding or this mismatch between what government wants to do and what the citizens are expecting kind of brings some conflict areas. And that is where I said at the beginning of the program, that is where we come in as the CCMT. To create platforms for dialogue, sustainable dialogue that should be able to bring win-win situation between what the nation does, enunciated by the Zimbabwe National Human Settlements Policy and the Vision 2030, and what the citizens want in terms of their individual rights and responsibilities. Because remember, this is where they are staying, this is their shelter, this is also where their livelihoods are based on. Those socioeconomic rights also need to be protected, they also need to be upgraded, they also need to be seen to be protected by the state.
All right.
Yeah.
Let me just see. Trimo, I wonder if you're back, because we are having communication problems where you are. All right, okay, we'll keep trying. Minister, I want to talk now about something which is very critical, and that's the compensation and relocation framework. You know, as a guide to processes where people and communities have to be moved, particularly to pave way for creation of new settlements or expansion of existing ones, and even infrastructure development, dams and road construction, for example. Now, I'm not sure if your ministry is fully, I know that you have to work with other ministries in government to achieve this, but how far has the government gone in this regard? Have you made any progress in putting together a comprehensive compensation and relocation framework, as Francis said, to sort of stop this conflict issues that could arise due to relocations?
Let me start by saying we have got what is called development-induced displacements. Those ones are pretty similar, because obviously when they're displaced, areas are already identified where they are relocated, and compensation in terms of the houses that they could have lost is done. Then we have got compensation to people who illegally settled themselves, like, and created these informal settlements. Like Caledonia is an example, which was a planned settlement, but people decided to build in the way of a road or under pylons. Yes, because government has got the right to look after every citizen. They have to be removed from there. Compensation can come in the form of identifying affordable pieces of land where they can go and be resettled. But we don't want people to take advantage of government and say, let me go and build in the way of a clinic or of a hospital, because after that I'll then be relocated and compensated. I think that is abuse of government. But there is a whole of government approach in this compensation framework, in the Minister of Finance, Minister of Lands, Minister of Local Government, and ourselves are seized with that matter.
But Minister, then, I mean, that then built, you know, I have to ask the question. I mean, if I've built, say, quite a decent home in Caledonia, and you're saying to me, this is illegal, we want to move you from here, and really the compensation is, I'll give you that piece of land where you can resettle, okay? In a way, would that not look a bit like demolishing or arbitrary movement of people? Because, I mean, I've got this big house now, which basically will have to be semi-knocked down if I move into a new piece of land. Isn't that something that could create conflict among the government and citizens?
Well, if you may say so, it can create conflict, but we are not demolishing people's homes. I mean, the government, His Excellency gave us a directive that do not demolish people's homes.
Even if I'm here legally?
Yes, provide alternative solutions first before you demolish.
Okay.
So we are providing those alternative solutions.
Okay. All right, okay. Francis, let me bring you in here. I mean, the Minister talked about development-induced displacement, DIDs, which CCMT is obviously working on. this whole conflict issue, I mean, we need processes to try and calm it down. We don't want to have this conflict between citizens, government, or local authorities. So what is the best way, in your opinion, your organization's opinion, to handle the issues of relocation and compensation?
Yeah, like, you know, we are a conflict resolution and transformation organization. That is what we wake up to do every day. And we have been doing that even in cases that are similar to what we are discussing. I would give you an example, probably 2 or 3 examples, to say that in the Midlands province, for instance, we have mediated in such a conflict between a local authority and a community that was residing without having been allocated that land by the local authority. And then we did manage to facilitate a process that created a win-win situation whereby that community was eventually incorporated into the master plan of the local authority, and then they were given favorable terms to then start paying for their stands. Yeah, I'm trying to say that this is very possible, and I'm happy that government is taking steps to try and come up with processes to do this. Then secondly, I should share with you and the viewers as well that I say to the minister that we are there as partners along the way because we believe in creating win-win situations. Not more than 3 weeks ago, we were actually in a process that we facilitated together with government through the Ministry of Local Government and Public Works and Honorable Garwe's ministry. We kickstarted the process of trying to see how best can we as a nation try to come up with the compensation and relocation framework that is sensitive to the needs of the citizens, sensitive to the needs of the government, but also try to get us to move in the direction that we want. So what we want to do, what we hope government is going to see to completion in the near future is completion of such relocation and compensation framework, and also to start kickstarting other processes that will then build on to that processes to see what we want to do.
All right, well, it's time for us to take a breather. You, of course, are watching The Chase, Zimbabwe's premier current affairs program, here live on ZTM Prime. Our discussion this evening, New Capital City, the battle for urban renewal. This program is brought to you by ZTN Prime and the Center for Conflict Management and Transformation, CCMT. As I said, it's time for a break. We'll be right back. Don't go away.
Welcome to Harare, population 1.5 million and counting.
Church to buy that cot.
My too has her friends thinking that she is a born and raised city slicker.
So are you asking as a friend or someone who needs content for the latest gossip column?
Welcome back. This is The Chase, Zimbabwe's premier current affairs program. Our discussion, New Capital City, the battle for urban renewal. This broadcast is brought to you by ZTM Prime and the Center for Conflict Management and Transformation, CCMT. Now, Francis, before the break, we started sort of touching on what I would call a rights-based approach to housing provision, okay? Now, maybe you could expand. I think you sort of touched on it. What are your views and thoughts on right-based approaches to housing provision, the rights of citizens, whether it be in the Constitution or their own human rights?
Yeah, thanks, Andy. You asked about my opinion, but I'm not going to specifically speak about my opinion. I'm going to speak about what the laws, the domestic law, which is our constitution, and international law, which also binds us as a nation, says. So in terms of United Nations statutes, of which we are a member state, and even AU statutes, and even the Constitution of Zimbabwe, the right to shelter is provided for. And freedom from arbitrary eviction is one of the rights that are also provided for in Section 74 of the Constitution, but also regionally by the African Union Convention for the Protection and Assistance of Internally Displaced Persons, which is called the Kampala Convention, which Zimbabwe signed and ratified. We are actually one of the first countries to ratify that. So it provides for those rights to say that citizens or any person for that matter cannot be arbitrarily displaced from their from their place of habitation.
Well, would you agree that the government, through the ministers articulated, the government is following that sort of policy, is following that semi-right? I mean, I'll ask the minister, but I just want your opinion.
Maybe the minister is best placed to answer that. But it is my personal hope and also the hopes of the citizens of Zimbabwe to say that if we could abide by that provision, which is a provision in the Constitution, I think we would be moving
to follow the law, and we won't have these issues about rights-based
we would be moving in the right direction. But also, apart from government having a responsibility to do that, as citizens, we also have got a responsibility to make sure that we do not put government in a tight situation where they will find themselves having to bring in the bulldozers
the bad or the worst.
Yeah, exactly. Which is why, as the CCMT, we are saying that in our work, we are advocating for relocation instead of demolition or displacements. Our gospel, our message is that we prefer relocation of citizens as opposed to demolition and displacement of citizens.
Okay.
That is what we are working to do, and that is what we are collaborating with other states and non-state actors to see if we can contribute in having that becoming a reality.
Okay. Minister, you know, it's interesting. Here we're talking a lot about urban housing and so forth. But as you said earlier, of course, there is the rural issue. And one issue, of course, that's interesting is the issue, say, of the government plan, which we're almost close to achieving, of 12 billion mining economy by 2023 or 2025. I mean, at the end of the day, you can also be displaced because of mining projects or happening around the area. So this displacement and relocation isn't necessarily only about housing in urban areas. And according to the Human Settlements Policy, all state land earmarked for human settlements has to be channeled to the ministry responsible for human settlements, which is, of course, your ministry. So how does your ministry and government in general go about that process, particularly when it isn't about relocating? You know, it's relocating because that's where they're living and they've lived there. Some citizens have lived there for, you know, as far as they can remember. It's their kumusha, it's where they came from. And you're relocating them from there to maybe in some areas miles away or not next door. It could be very far away. How do you manage that process? It seems quite difficult.
It's a complex situation. But we are managing it. I want to respond to what my colleague said earlier on, that we prefer relocations as opposed to demolitions. And I couldn't have said it any better, because that's what government is doing. We stopped demolition. The new dispensation stopped demolition, said no houses should be demolished. Let's identify developable spaces and then develop them, build flats. That's why we under the policy, we've got a statement on densification, which is construction of either cluster housing or building of flats, vertical construction, to ensure that people can be relocated from where they are to safer places. Because there is no point, yes, you've built a very beautiful house, but you've built it in the middle of a flay. When floods come because of the climate change, that beautiful house is going to be swept away together with your family. So it doesn't help to continue allowing you to live in such conditions. So relocation is what government is doing right now. Coming to the issue of mining and mining development, I referred to development-induced displacements. Okay. Mining is one such. Dam construction is yet another. Even the road construction is another. Within the mining environment, government is working very closely with all the mining houses to ensure that they fall within the compensation framework. People that are being displaced or relocated will be compensated fully by the mining house that is carrying out mining activities in that area. A good example is what Zimplats is doing in Makwiro. I mean, they have built beautiful houses. If you go to Zimplats right now, it's like you're in another city. So in all the other development companies are being encouraged to do that. If you go to Manise, we've got the steel company coming. is going to be creating a new human settlements, a new town for that matter, predominantly for the employees of that area. But once it's a settlement, it attracts other people to come and live there. So yes, we are looking at that. We recognize that land is a finite product, and we cannot leisurely be expanding horizontally. I wanted to re-emphasize the fact that we have now taken a move to build vertically. And for us to be built vertically and affordably, we now need to have a paradigm shift from the traditional brick and mortar methods.
I was going to say, Minister, because it's also a mental shift, is it not? Because at the moment, we like our house, we like our garden to grow our maize and our vegetables, and suddenly you're telling me, go up.
There has to be a paradigm shift. There has to be a mental shift. And I'm happy that, yes, the fixed mentality is within our generation. But the youngsters, that because they are global citizens, they've been exposed to the world, they are not worried about having 5 acres of a piece of land, and yet they're only utilizing 200 square meters. They don't mind living in the 60th floor.
Francis, I'll come to you, Francis, but there's something I just need you to clarify, Minister. I tried to get to it earlier, but I'm on an illegal piece of land. I built there illegally. I didn't get the right clearances, and I built a house. Okay, I have a house, okay? And I now need to be relocated. So what then happens to this house? Because you're saying you can't be there, Andy, you're on a flay, you're on a wetland, you have to relocate, we've identified another piece of land for you, but on my piece of land, which is illegal, I have a beautiful 2-story house. What then happens?
We need to be honest with ourselves. When a person decides to turn himself into a criminal, into a thief, he must be prepared for the consequences of stealing. When you decide to go and build in an illegal area, you must also be prepared for the consequences thereof. You cannot turn around and say, well, there is a constitution which says there is a right to shelter. And when you know that, yes, there is a right to shelter, and the government is working very hard to address that. But surely let's move away from continuously breaking the law, wanting to come and politicize the whole process that government is coming to demolish. I think it's unfair by citizens on the part of government. So that must not be allowed to continue happening.
And Francis, I can see you're itching to comment. Please.
I agree with the Minister that criminality should not be allowed to flourish. And I know for a fact that, for instance, the government commissioned a study on an inquiry into the urban settlement areas, I think, which was handed over to the President on the 9th of December in 2019, I think. And one of the recommendations in there is to say that land barons have got to be brought to account. I think that could be, Minister, I think that could be one good starting point to say that if we're going to set a very good example, a very clear message to say that this is unacceptable, then we could probably need to start with those land barons that are identified in those reports. Not only that, the report, I just read part of the report, also it's got some very good recommendations about improving coordination between state actors, government departments and government ministries on how they to regularize these settlements. But I should also say that, as the Minister said, as the CCMT, we've been working on issues of development and just displacements across the country. And let me also say that this is not a challenge or a phenomenon that is peculiar to Zimbabwe. It's happening the world over, even in China. Dam construction displaced more than 1 million people, even in Ghana. And even here, when the Kariba Dam was constructed, there was displacement of people from our Zimbabwean side, but also from the Zambian side. So what we've done and what we've been doing as the CCMT is to try and find what we call policy recommendations around which how can issues of development and just displacement be handled in a way that is constructive and win-win for all parties involved. The first one is that we believe that issues of relocation in terms within the context of development and just displacement should be informed by the concept of free, prior and informed consent, to say that those that are said to be affected or relocated or displaced are also got to have a voice. They've got to also to be consulted. They've also got to have their feelings known in terms of how they think their issues can be addressed. The second one is to say that in the context of development, not that citizens should not be moved to pay for development, but they also should be able to benefit from processes such as those. We've got to come up with mechanisms to ensure that those that are affected also, especially in terms of livelihoods, also get to benefit. Then the issue of compensation that we've been speaking about, the practice has been that compensation is thought of in retrospect toward the end of the processes. But what we are saying as the third recommendation, as the CCMT, is to say that compensation is going to be thought of right from the beginning. When we do environmental impact assessments, some now call them environmental and social impact assessments. We've got to factor in the potential negative consequence of development induced displacement and try to find ways through which those that are affected can also be benefiting. And we've got to do that at the beginning, not at the end. So when the processes start in consultation with those people, I think within that regard, it's one of the ways through which we can then start saying development is unjust. Because if it leaves people in a worse of situation than they were before development started, then it ceases to be development in the end. That is one area that then breeds a conflict when people feel aggrieved because they do not see that kind of development. But if we do what Minister says government is trying to do, then
you see the way forward.
Yeah, and seek the way forward, but most importantly, make sure that the people are consulted. They get to know the potential benefit that they can get from that development process. Because why they are resisting that is because in some cases they do not get to.
Francis, I have to jump in because unfortunately we are running out of time, and I wanted to bring the minister. And Minister, I know you can respond quickly to what Francis said, but your view. You've highlighted the strides Zimbabwe has made to provide housing. So the question is, are we on track to meet the target 225,000 houses 2030? Do you think more needs to be done? Do you think more needs to be speeded up? Do you think the government needs additional tools or not to get this process up? Because I looked at the numbers, 225,000. I think it's over 350,000 now if you count the houses that have been built, but there's still 2 million people. There's still a big gap between what the government can provide and what is required.
Maybe before I respond to that, I just want to add to what my colleague was talking about. I mean, before any massive or any major developments are taken, whether it's dam construction, whether it's road construction, or whether it's a mine, a feasibility study is carried out. And within that feasibility study, all stakeholders are engaged, including the villagers, if it's in the rural communities. So feasibility study covers what needs to be done. There is no way that government will embark on a massive development project from nowhere and people start seeing bulldozers and construction equipment. No.
Right, Minister, so I need to, we're running out of time, but your issue, are we going to meet our target, 2030?
We have got 225,000 housing units target by 2025.
2025.
And 2 million houses by 2030. We have, since the pronouncement of the policy, we have now delivered 156,000 housing units in the country. And this is in collaboration with the private sector. The private sector has contributed about 65% of the houses that have been constructed, and the government is contributing the 35% under the social housing program.
So your view, 2 million houses by 2030?
It's
achievable?
Quite possible.
We can do it. We're going to do it, rather.
We're already doing it because we've now moved away from the traditional methods of construction to using new technologies that ensure that there is fast delivery of housing at affordable rates and within the climate change dictates. So yes, it's possible.
All right, thank you. We have unfortunately come to the end of the chase. I always say on the chase that we could continue talking because really housing for all and accommodation for all is very critical. But as I said, we've come to the end of the chase this evening. This is Zimbabwe's premier current affairs program. Our discussion, New Capital City, the battle for urban renewal. I'd like to thank my guests, Honourable Minister Daniel Garwe, Zimbabwe's Minister of National Housing and Social Amenities, Francis Mukora, Advocacy Officer, the Centre for Conflict Management and Transformation, CCMT, and of course, Chimo Muderere, who joined us telephonically. Unfortunately, we had problems communicating with him. He's an urban planning specialist. Gentlemen, thank you so much for appearing on the chase. A final thought. Physical and/or economic displacement or relocations for urbanization often leads to unhappiness by the affected communities and sometimes even resistance, which can even stall development. It is therefore necessary for drivers and stakeholders of such development processes, state and non-state actors alike, to adopt inclusive steps, such as creating public awareness about these processes, particularly how citizens may be affected, the benefits they can potentially get, and how those challenges will be addressed in a way that ensures win-win outcomes for both national development and communities' rights. Never forget that together we can mind the gap, leave no one and no place behind. I'm Andy Hodges. Have a good evening, good night, and please, you all be safe.